Hello again. I imagine over the Christmas period, many people will be enjoying a glass of Bucks Fizz, and it's that's given the title to this video in terms of one of their songs, The Land of Make Believe. The relevance of that is in the context of what I uh, wrote in Lost to the Races, the videos I posted on my other channel, which is I can't access after the UK police state terror that my wife and I suffered in November. But the videos on there and the videos on this channel, they um, they focus very heavily on narrative, and I've spoken a lot about the sophist approach and the Socratic approach. The sophist approach is really narrative; it's the twisting and distortion of narrative, and we are living in this world, as I've said quite a few times, uh, where the people who govern us or dictate us, whichever your view on that is, um, they they live in this fantasy world where they believe that if you invent a narrative, it's so relevant to everything I've discussed. If you invent a narrative, it will eventually come true. You can invent reality, and the video I've done, when I've the previous one when I've discussed Ukraine, that's a major example of that in terms of this disastrous proxy war that's going so badly wrong for the UK and Europe after the Americans saw the reality of the war under Trump and said there's going to be no more funding, and particularly even more disastrous after their national security document strategy came out, and they show where their priorities are in terms of where they strategically want to place themselves in the world, and they don't see Russia as an enemy like Europe does, and the UK tries to do. Um, so we've got this reality that is being pumped out to us relentlessly in the hope that we will accept it, and that's why you see so much of this effort to try to, because of what the Americans have done, the Europeans and the UK are desperate to try to keep this conflict alive so they can avoid having to go to their people and effectively say, look, we've squandered huge amounts of Ukrainian lives, we've squandered huge amounts of money, money we don't have, money that we're already taxing you up to the hilt to to keep declining public services going, if you like. And they know that the public will be furious about that. So they're desperately trying to keep this narrative going, that Russia's a threat and it's going to invade Europe. And you see these attacks on tankers. You've seen the invasion of Kursk in Russia. Um, these are largely supported by mainly British intelligence, but also some backup from Europe, and they're designed to effectively create a provocation where Russia will launch a missile at perhaps Poland, Germany. Um, I don't think they would go as far as the UK, but they want to elicit this provocation so they can then go to the United States and say, look, Russia, we were right all along. Russia really does want to attack Europe. You must now come in to help us. All this to prevent a disastrous conclusion of their own populations looking at it and saying, well, you know, had you sat down with Russia, understood their concerns, had you joined the Turkish sponsored peace talks at the beginning of the war, so much of this could have been avoided. And we don't have to be in conflict with Russia. They might not be our ideal friends, but they needn't be our enemies either. So back onto our own case, where so I've said in the previous videos how this these series of videos really have largely serving their purpose, because we brought out the royal flush of coordinated coercion. The FCA, South Tyneside Council, and to a supportive degree, Northumbria Police, and latterly Rachel Hudson. As we've started to do our own work on what's happened, we can now see, that this action was effectively coordinated. So Northumbria Police, fronted by Adam Lloyd, 1812. He's not running it, he's just fronting it. So people that are running it are just putting his face on it. Was coordinated by South Tyneside Council and Rachel Hudson. Actually, in the past, a few months back, I received an email from a chap called John Rummy from South Tyneside Council saying, this is harassment, which is the same language that Hudson's used. Their euphemism for harassment is essentially what I've just explained to you at the start of the video. It's these phony narratives that they put out when you use a Socratic method and you get behind them and say, no, actually, you're doing really, really bad things. You're not telling the truth. The reality is very, very different. That's what they call harassment. So in the essence, me saying there's been vast falsification of evidence here. On our case alone, we believe that this is a vast problem throughout the whole sector. Falsification of evidence. There's been a young girl, our younger daughter, that's had her Polish heritage destroyed to ready a manufacturer into a cash generative asset to trade with a private equity owned agency. That's harassment, even though it's true, because if you look at the growth of long-term care orders and you look at the growth of private equity in the industry and buying up these agencies and accommodation providers and so on, it's like a hand to a glove. They want those long-term government-backed cash flows. So that's harassment in their minds. So we know that South Tyneside Council are working with Judge Hudson on this. They did Hudson because she hadn't previously. I got to the point, so we set that bait for Hudson in saying, Judge is on notice. We knew that they were watching. We knew the people were watching, and we knew that she was being kept informed. And we just needed her to pull forward to get that full line, full house of coordinated coercion. And there's a few other interesting things that we've looked at as well. As I said to you, they try to say they're about this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. But we've got so much recorded evidence that will be put out, and not initially on this platform. These videos are for a different reason, and the output we're going to put out is more complex, so it can't be done initially on YouTube, but it will find its way on YouTube in due course. So in essence, we've got so much of them saying, well, why don't you try to reconcile children with their families? Well, we never do that. We never do that. Because they can't. Because effectively, if you're feeding something into a long-term cash generative model, you don't want to break it. And we've got so much evidence of that, which is a gross distortion of the system. We know that this phony narrative of the car, we know that they don't even believe that's true. They know it's unsustainable. And eventually what they will do is they're trying to trawl through the devices, and I'll explain to you what they're looking for actually on that soon. They're trying to trawl through these devices in the hope of finding something. And then they'll say, oh, we didn't actually, there is no evidence that you've done anything to her car, and all this time machine nonsense and so on and so forth. But by the way, we've got this. And that's effectively what they're trying to do. And as I said, it, it's another example of phony narrative. How can we force our way into his property? In my mind, steal his devices. They'll say seize, but nobody votes for these laws. Nobody sees these laws. They never appear in anyone's manifesto, so people can evaluate these laws. So what they want to do is, how can we strengthen our case to get our order to force our way into his property, act with brutality, terrorize him and his wife, and steal his devices and interrogate his devices. So they invent a narrative. This business with spray painting cars. It's the same narrative as I said to you, that the Dawn Sturgis inquiry. Again, no disrespect whatsoever to Dawn Sturgis, whose death was a tragedy. They wanted to create a narrative that these Russian agents levitated down a cul-de-sac in Salisbury, and without any protection and without being seen, sprayed lethal nerve agent on the door handle, ghosted out, and then when it was all over, took the time to repackage this fake perfume bottle and reseal it, and then dispose it, and then just saunter to a railway station and leave. So you just invent. You want to say, "Oh, this is Russia. This is Russia. This is another example of how bad Russia is." I'm not saying Russia's all good. I'm not saying Putin's all good. That's not my point. But they want it to create an impression at a certain time, so they pump out fake narrative, and it's the same what they've done with me. And you can see, actually, we it really did interest us, this spray painting car business, because we've spoken to a lot of people um, about Rachel Hudson, her career, their experiences of her. Often people have had very, very bad experiences of her and come to broadly similar conclusions that what I've done, my colleague had done, and the horrendous experience my wife and I had with her. Um, and we're sure that none of them have done anything to a property. It wouldn't interest them. They're exactly like ourselves. It just wouldn't achieve anything. What's the point ultimately? Um, and also, we started to look into it. And we can't actually find any credible records that these incidents were ever reported to the police either, in a formalized way. So I'm very much looking forward to, if they move on this, trying to get evidence that these incidents were actually properly logged with the police, because we've not been able to find that to date, which is extremely concerning, and although not surprising. And then we can look at the phony narrative that Lloyd's used, because they came in, they took these devices, they took me away, wouldn't even let me put my shoes on. Lloyd assaulted me in the car. I had an injury to my arm. They put the cuffs on too tight. I was extremely worried about my wife, because she was in a very distressed state when I was taken from the property. Lloyd's colleague bullied past her when I asked my wife just to turn off my work devices. So I wanted to protect them, because they are absolutely nothing to do with it. And they know that. And he bullied his way past her, terrorized her, and didn't even explain the act he was enforcing to do it. So it was a horrendous operation. And the phony narrative, which I posted in quite a lot of his emails in previous videos, the phony narrative he's used around passwords is really interesting, because it shows that he's making big mistakes, and it shows that this isn't about what they say it's about. Because you think about it, he takes the passwords away. Actually, on the day my wife was terrorized in the kitchen, told she couldn't leave the kitchen unless she went to the toilet, and that had to be supervised. That's how bad it was. That's how awful these people are. She said, "Well, what about passwords?" He said, "Oh, it's not really necessary." That was recorded on their body cam. I wonder if that'll go missing. But anyway, he after we chase him, he's told to not contact us, because what they've told Lloyd to do is, we've now cut him out of his lines of communication, so he will contact you. They will contact you, and let's see the method he uses. So, substitute email, substitute phone, so on and so forth. So he was told to back off and wait and let us come, because clearly you're worried about your devices and when you're going to get them back. And unfortunately, have these draconian powers. They can pretty much do what they want. It's police state terror by any stretch of the imagination. So then he eventually comes back, and we've made numerous calls and numerous emails, and then we're given his email. And he eventually comes back, and look at the email he did, and it's in the earlier videos that I posted. He said, "Did you provide passwords?" So this was almost like 2 weeks after the device was taken. This, what the person we were told is the is the leading investigative officer, which he isn't really. He's fronting but not doing. But let's use that language. So here we are. He doesn't even know, claiming to know, 2 weeks after, whether we gave passwords. I think if you're leading something, you really should know. And then he tries to offer some phony narrative around it could, it may, if you provide them, speed it up, but it still could. So he's using vague language, because what he wants to do is he wants to hold them for longer to punish me and put my wife and I in a position of distress. He wants us to to suffer both physical and mental illness. Um, Often the two are related. So he wants a pretext to hold on to them for longer to to achieve that. It's a very cowardly act, but it's very, very common with police states. Now I'd like to go on to why they really took the devices and what they really are looking for. Because as I explained to you, I've done throughout from my life, and it's not something I make money from, but I've engaged in a lot of um, corruption work, work on corruption and so on and so forth. And it's done with a very smart network of people, and we all have our specialisms and so on and so forth. And the FCA are aware, South Tyneside are aware, and Rachel Hudson's aware. So and Northumbria Police as well. The full house of coordinated coercion that stepped forward that we've unmasked are aware that we've been doing extensive research into respective areas. So, for instance, the FCA, how have we managed that? Have I've just my role, as I explained in the previous video, is really analysing and saying, look, these are the areas if we're going to find something it's going to be, and then my colleagues set about the work. Um, is there people ultimately who have become very unhappy with the organisation, either left or thinking of leaving? They're very, very unhappy, either the way they've been treated, at what they've been asked to do, or what they've seen been doing. So in terms of the FCA, the people have helped because the common theme we get is legal capture. It's subject to, the organisation has been subject to legal capture. It's putting out these fake narratives to elevate its own um, reputation above the people who fund it, the people they should look after, the consumers, and particularly the consumers that have been subject to great harm via financial scandals. So it's like this legal capture that leads them into pumping out this fake narrative. And I've taken apart quite a lot of it in the other channel. So those people have been very willing to help. They've explained how these things come about. There's also some others that have been they've been very, very distressed in the manner of their departures, and the oppressive documentation they've had to sign on leaving and things like that. So yeah, that's how that sort of comes out in terms of South Tyneside Council. The same essentially. That there's a clique in social services, and there's a very, very nasty, venomous group. And unless you're in that group, people are treated very, very poorly. We've had this time and time again. They've come, and I've seen a lot of the material that's been collected on that. And we can also see we've seen a lot of material on that. The people that have just been horrified by what they've seen, the falsification of information, the way that children are psychologically terrorized, and they've they've tried to raise it and been managed out and had to sign some very oppressive documents as well, or they've just left because they just find it just so nauseous. And sometimes people that are within there who want to get out. They're very, very worried about their circumstances, but they want to do something about what they're seeing or what they've seen. In terms of Rachel Hudson, yeah, she's had a long career. She's worked her way through the whole system almost, which is a great interest, and it's about understanding how she and the council, South Tyneside Council, and other councils, it's not just Rachel Hudson as well. There are other family court officials around the country. How they interact with this vast ecosystem of private organisations that are feeding off the system, consultancies, interactions, and things like that. And so that's really what we've done with her. And they want to see. So they're looking at my device because they know. I think they know we're not bluffing, and they're entitled to believe we're bluffing. Who cares? But it's going to happen anyway. So they're looking at my devices on the hope that they can find this information. And it's really interesting. The other thing we've been getting through quite recently is they're getting worried, particularly South Tyneside Council, because the social workers are running to the legal teams and their legal services, and they're squealing, saying, "What we're doing about this man?" And legal services saying, "We're dealing with it. We're doing this harassment, and we've got some other angles to come up as well." So we're seeing that, and they're saying to the social workers, "Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry." But it really is a Russian doll system. So when eventually we come to the point of putting this out, and I'll explain how that might happen, it will change because, and you'll see this on rape gangs. I would think on, perhaps Rupert Lowe's output is the legal system, the legal services set the social workers up to do the nasty digging, the nasty work, the groundwork, and they try to have this distance between them, at which they can throw them. Common phrases, throw them under the bus. So that's really uh, what ultimately they will try to do. But at the moment, they're trying to keep the social workers, Deirdre Ryans and so on, and Grants and so on, saying, "Look, we'll deal with this. We'll deal with this. We'll deal with this. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry." And it's been fascinating getting the feedback about that. We've been watching it for quite some time. I had quite a bit back in the recent days. So they're in a strange position now collectively because, and this is where bullies fail ultimately, because the a bully may be bigger than you, because, well, in this case they are, because they can use your own resources against you. None of them have any money. They just pull down on the third estate, so they use your own money against you. Except the FCA, slightly different, because they feed off the industry and ultimately the consumers who buy financial services products. But ultimately, they have no money, and they use their resources against you. So it's, in terms of bully, they are bigger in that respect. But where a bully runs out of line is when the people they're bullying, which in this case is me and so on, stand up and say, "I don't care anymore. Even if you beat me, shoot me, these strange altercations that happen, these threats that happen, this police state terror that happens, it's going to happen. All they will do is, by trying to terrorize me and bully me, they will draw more attention, raise more profile, step forward, then we unleash the content." So in many ways, they're now captured by their own bullying in some ways, because regardless, even if I was shot today or whatever, or run over, these things possibly could happen, or some strange death or something like that. It wouldn't stop the work being published. And we do have, I mean, for instance, some of it is going to include material from our own case hearings, the final hearing and the case management hearing. And they'll say, "Well, that's illegal. This is blah, 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 blah." Yeah, it is, but it isn't in another sense because whilst it should be respected, the privacy behind closed doors and so on and so forth, it should only be respected if it's done within good sentiment and with the right motivations, which is protecting children, not fostering this awful trade. That is why we will be using content, and it will include Rachel Hudson in various guises, how she managed it, how she led it to a conclusion where there was no Polish representative in the final hearing, how she kept concerns of racism away when they were allowed to sit in on case management hearings, how she acted like quite frankly, a very, very unpleasant bully, in particular with her interactions with my wife's barrister, who was appearing remotely because her solicitor made so many mismanaged the case so much. She ended up with a barrister from Manchester appearing remotely. But nevertheless, lady did what she had to do, but was treated appallingly. I was embarrassed by Rachel Hudson. So that will be included as well. How she refused to acknowledge falsification of evidence, suppression of our daughter's Polish heritage, and so forth. So it is going to happen. So regardless of what Rachel Hudson does, this is going to happen. So you know they can push and terrorize me as much as they want. They just build a bigger audience for the output, which will it won't be on YouTube, and I can't explain where it's going to be because that would be foolish to do so. But they are effectively creating their own demand for their own material. Fundamentally, the FCA are going to have to confront the reality that they elevate their own interests above the welfare of the victims of financial scandals, even when the victims of the financial scandals were victims because of partly, not wholly of course, partly because of their own catastrophic errors. The UK government, both past and present, are going to have to face the reality that because of the secondary objective and the desire to drive growth through financial services, along with the FCA, will also have to acknowledge the same thing, that the small group of victims, and this applies to Woodford as well, have been sacrificed for the greater good of growth, which we may or may not see. Here's another one for you might want to contemplate. Isn't it very strange that Jess Staley was sort of heavily fined and punished because he didn't disclose wasn't seen to disclose the closeness of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, instead of being asked whether he did anything wrong legally. And I don't know whether he did or he didn't, but that was really the pertinent question. But isn't it strange how J.P. Morgan, that we're now Rachel Reeves was celebrating in a select committee appearance, Treasury Select Committee appearance, that after a budget, JPM had said that they're going to invest all this money in the UK. But have the FCA or the UK government gone to JPM and said, actually, can you tell us how much of Epstein's money was laundered through the UK during this time? Surely it was not all Jess Daly's fault. Jess Daly will have reported to somebody. You can't put it all on him. How much? If indeed there was money pumped through the UK, and so if you're going to say Jess Daly was to be punished because of not being candid about closeness relationship, what about JPM and the money that they were managing for Epstein? How much of that came through the UK? No one wants to ask that. Yeah, secondary objective. So you can see, so they are going to have to confront these realities. Rachel Hudson is going to have to confront the reality of abuse of her role. And I would say to her, look, a lot of this could have been avoided and still could be made easier than it's going to be. You have to realize that your role is untenable. I think you need to just step down, realize that you've made terrible mistakes, and try to put them right. That would be my advice. It doesn't hurt. We're not out here saying who can we go after, just randomly picking names out of a hat. Not at all. We're just identifying people that have abused their position and done very, very bad things. The same with South Tyneside Council. We don't. The people. It's not the people. It's their actions that we're interested in. The people. They're really irrelevant in some ways. It's what they've done. We're not. There's nothing personal about it. And the same with her. She's going to have to confront on our case, which I've got more to come on videos taken through. Um, she's going to have to confront what she's done, and South Tyneside Council. And the UK financial system is going to have to confront the reality of what it's allowing to happen within the financial system. This awful trade of children. Now, there's a book here, Aristotle, Politics. Well, the Politics. And we have to make some allowances for his age, for the time which he's writing this, of course. But he talks about slavery at the beginning of it, and let's be honest, slavery is an awful thing. But his use of slavery is quite broad. Not that makes it good, and some of it includes humans being human property, effectively. And it's quite interesting because the UK will go back and say in the 1830s we abolished slavery and so on and so forth, and they did do some good work to try to discourage its use. So I'll give that to the UK. But you know, the people who were utilising slaves in this abhorrent way were compensated for freeing them, so the slaves were seen as human property rather than prisoners. They should have been let go and compensate themselves. No compensation to the owner who's already exploited them in probably brutal ways. And this debt that was raised to compensate the slave owners, of which there were hundreds, I think was only paid off and fully serviced in, I think it was 2015. And it was the third estate, the taxpayer, who had to service that. So the taxpayer had to service a loan taken to compensate the owners of slaves. So the UK's role is not as virtuous as it seems. And has the UK learned that much? Because let's think about this. Because in terms of these children who were emotionally sterilized and financially tortured to create that severance of emotional attachment to their parents, effectively have become human property as well, to be traded with a private equity owned for profit organization. So many ways, this is a modern slavery that the UK is involved in that's leading into the financial system. And our output is going to make everybody aware of that and show how people profit from the whole system. And this is going to happen. And regardless of what you do to me, what you try to do to terrorize me, what you try to do to harm my mental and physical health, I could die today and it will still happen. Anyway, that's it. Quite a long one today. Take care. Goodbye and watch out for the backspace.